Imagine standing on the sun-baked plains of Boeotia in the summer of 479 BC, the air thick with dust and the distant thunder of 40,000 Persian feet marching across the shallow Asopus River. 40,000 of the great king's finest troops, the 10,000 golden armored immortals at the heart, were spear butts capped with gleaming pomegranates, fierce Medes and Bactrians in scale and silk, Indian infantry with longbows, Sake horsemen swirling on the wings, and thousands of Greek traders from Thebes eager to prove their loyalty to the invader. Their general, Mardonius, hand-picked by Xerxes himself, rides at the front on a snow-white Nicaean stallion, purple cloak billowing, certain that this dawn will finally erase the shame of Thermopylae and Salamis. For 11 long days his cavalry has tormented the Greeks, cutting water convoys, showering arrows from horseback, turning the Greek positions along the foothills of Mount Cithaeron into a furnace of thirst and frustration. The largest Greek army ever assembled, more than 100,000 hoplites from Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Megara, Tegea, and dozens of smaller cities, has held firm under the command of the Spartan regent Pausanias. But now supplies are exhausted, men are weakening, and in the black of night, Pausanias orders a desperate withdrawal to fresh springs and better ground nearer the town of Plataea. The maneuver unravels in darkness and confusion. The center drifts too far toward the town. The left wing of Athenians veers off course. Contingents lose contact, and by first light, the Greek line lies scattered and exposed. Mardonius sees his chance. He throws everything forward in one massive assault, believing the Greeks are in full retreat. 40,000 elite troops surge across the river in a glittering wave, arrows already knocking, war cries rising in Persian, Median, and Greek. On a low ridge known later as the island, the rear guard stands alone. 5,000 full Spartan citizens, the professional peers, men who have trained every day since age 7 for war, flanked by 1,500 proud Tegeans on their right and supported by Perioikoi hoplites. These are the veterans in crimson cloaks, lambda shields locked, 8-foot spears lowered, bronze helmets bowed in silence. Outnumbered more than 5-1 by the oncoming storm, they do not move. They wait. Arrows fall like hail, men die where they stand, shields splintering, but the phalanx holds like living bronze. Pausanias in the center offers sacrifice after sacrifice on a small altar, seeking favorable omens from the gods. The livers remain dark, the signs unfavorable, the arrows keep coming. The Tegeans grow restless, their blood boiling after days of humiliation. Suddenly, without waiting for final permission, the Tegeans charge downhill, spears leveled, roaring their ancient war cry. Pausanias looks one last time to the heavens, sees the smoke of the sacrifice shift, and knows the moment has come. He raises his voice in prayer toward the temple of Hera visible on the heights, then screams the order every Spartan has waited a lifetime to hear. The entire Spartan line explodes forward, not a measured advance, but a ferocious, full-armor sprint down the slope, 8 ranks deep, shields crashing together, spears dropping as one. The impact is cataclysmic. Heavy Greek bronze and oak smash through Persian wicker and scale like thunder through parchment. The front rank of Spartans drives their spears through chests and throats, lifts men bodily off the ground, steps over the impaled and keeps pushing. The second rank follows, thrusting overhand into faces and necks. The third rank steps up, and the fourth, an unstoppable machine of death rolling forward. The immortals, proudest warriors of the empire, stagger under the weight. Their shorter spears and lighter armor are useless in the crush. Mardonius, seeing his center buckling, spurs his horse forward, shouting commands, golden armor blazing like a beacon. A Spartan veteran named Amnestus, eyes locked on that golden target, heaves through the press, heaves a jagged stone the size of a helmet, and hurls it with all the fury of Thermopylae. The rock strikes true. Mardonius's skull shatters. He topples lifeless from the saddle, blood pooling beneath the hooves of his panicked horse. In that single heartbeat, the Persian army breaks. The death of their commander is a sign from Ahura Mazda himself that favor has turned. Panic spreads faster than any arrow. The immortals waver, then shatter. Men throw down weapons and run. The cavalry on the wings, meant to envelop, suddenly finds itself chased by screaming Tegians. The Theban traitors on the Persian left see the crimson cloaks cutting deeper and remember the oaths they broke. They turn and flee. The Spartans do not slow. They drive the broken enemy all the way back to the Esopus, spears rising and falling in relentless rhythm, cutting down officers, trampling the wounded, turning the shallow river into a crimson torrent. Across the field, the Athenians hear the roar of victory and surge against their own opponents, crushing the Thebans in turn. By midday, the pursuit reaches the fortified Persian camp, a massive wooden stockade filled with treasure, slaves, and the remnants of the invasion force. Tegians breach the walls first, Spartans and Athenians pour in behind, and what follows is not battle, but slaughter. Tents burn, gold scatters, bodies pile in heaps. When the sun begins its descent, the plain of Plataea lies silent under a carpet of Persian dead. Ancient sources speak of tens of thousands fallen, the flower of the empire destroyed in hours. Greek losses are astonishingly light. Only 91 Spartans, 16 Tegians, and 52 Athenians among the heavy infantry, the gods' favor undeniable. That very night, the surviving Persian commander Artabazus gathers what remains, perhaps 40,000 shaken men, and slips away northward, abandoning wagons, wounded, and pride, never to return. The second Persian invasion ends not in triumph, but in annihilation. The dream of conquering Greece dies forever on that blood-soaked field, crushed beneath the sandals of men who refuse to yield a single step. Plataea avenges the 300 of Thermopylae, the burned temples of Athens, every village razed in the march of Xerxes. It proves that no empire, however vast, no army, however numerous, can conquer free men fighting for their soil, their gods, and the ashes of their fallen brothers. The veterans who made that charge, those 5,000 Spartans of the core moving as one perfect instrument of war, walk back up the ridge in silence at dusk, wipe the blood from their spears, and speak no boasts, because for them the deed is enough. Greece is saved. The light of freedom, philosophy, art, and democracy that would one day illuminate the world is preserved by the unbreakable will of those crimson-cloaked warriors who looked 40,000 invaders in the eye and charged. Think about those odds one more time. 5,000 against 40,000 elite, light armor against heavy bronze, arrogance against discipline, and in one single thunderous charge, the invaders were crushed, their commanders slain, their empire's dreams shattered forever. This was Plataea. This was vengeance. This was the day the world learned what true courage can do.
The victory at Plataea did not end with the setting sun on that fateful day. Its echoes rippled across the centuries, shaping the world we know today. As the Persian survivors fled north under cover of darkness, leaving behind mountains of unburied dead, wagons of untold treasure, and the shattered pride of the greatest empire on earth, the Greeks stood amid the carnage in stunned reverence. Pausanias ordered the spoils gathered, golden bowls, purple tents, silver-footed couches, horses with jeweled bridles, coins from every corner of the known world. So vast was the plunder that it took 10 full days to collect and divide it among the allied cities. The Tegeans received special honor for their bold first charge, the Athenians for their stubborn fight on the wing. But every man knew the heart of the victory belonged to the Spartans, those silent veterans in crimson who had turned certain defeat into annihilation. 1/10 of all treasure was set aside for the gods, a massive golden tripod raised at Delphi, inscribed with the names of every city that fought, a monument that would stand for generations as proof that united free men could humble any tyrant. The bodies of the fallen Greeks were buried with full honors on the field itself, simple mounds for most, but for the Spartans, a separate stone lion was raised over their 91 dead, a silent guardian watching the plain where they had proven unbreakable. Mardonius's corpse, stripped of its golden armor, was left for the crows, a deliberate insult that sent a message to every Eastern king: this is what awaits those who dare invade Hellas. News of the triumph spread like wildfire across the Aegean. In Athens, still smoldering from Xerxes' torches the year before, citizens wept in the streets, sacrificing 100 oxen to Zeus the Savior. In Sparta, the women who had sent their sons and husbands with the words, "Return with your shield or on it," now welcomed them home in solemn procession. No songs, no boasts, just the quiet pride of a people who knew their way of life had been preserved by blood and bronze. Across the Greek world, the chains of fear that had bound them since Xerxes crossed the Hellespont snapped forever. City after city rose in revolt against Persian garrisons. The Ionian Greeks on the Asian coast seized their moment and joined the fight. That same autumn, the Greek fleet sailed east and crushed the remaining Persian navy at Mycale, burning their ships on the beach in a mirror of Plataea's slaughter. The double victory, Plataea on land, Mycale at sea, marked the turning point. Never again would a Persian army set foot on European soil. The age of Greek freedom dawned. Playwrights in Athens would soon write tragedies and comedies that explored the human soul. Philosophers would walk the agora asking questions no subject people could dare ask. Sculptors would carve marble gods and athletes that still awe us today. All of it made possible because on one hot morning in Boeotia, 5,000 Spartan veterans, supported by their fierce Tegean brothers, looked across a river at 40,000 invaders and chose to charge. Think about that moment again, the dust rising from 40,000 feet, the arrows falling like black rain, the golden commander certain of victory, and then the sudden impossible roar as crimson cloaks surged forward, shields locked, spears flashing, an entire empire's dream crushed in the span of a single morning. No divine wind scattered the enemy, no trick of terrain saved the day, just discipline forged over lifetimes, courage honed since childhood, and the unbreakable will of free men who would rather die than kneel. Plataea was not just a battle, it was a declaration. It told every future generation that numbers mean nothing when weighed against men who fight for their homes, their laws, their children's future. It proved that courage is contagious, that one bold charge can turn retreat into pursuit, despair into legend. And it reminds us, even now, in a world that sometimes feels overwhelmed by distant powers and endless threats, what a few determined souls can achieve when they refuse to yield. Those 700 lifetimes of training compressed into the core of that charge, the professional Spartiates who led the line, became the shield that guarded everything we call Western civilization: democracy, reason, individual liberty, art that moves the soul. All of it preserved on that plain because a handful of veterans decided the fate of Greece was worth one final thunderous advance. So when you hear stories of impossible odds, when you face your own battles that seem too large, remember Plataea. Remember the crimson cloaks advancing through the storm of arrows. Remember the stone that fell the general and broke an empire. Remember that on that day, 700 Spartan veterans, backed by their brothers, did not just win a battle, they crushed 40,000 invaders in a single charge. They avenged their fallen king and his 300. They saved Greece. And in doing so, they saved the future. This was Plataea. This was the day freedom proved stronger than any empire. This was the charge that changed history forever.
And yet, even as the Greeks celebrated, the lessons of Plataea burned deeper than mere victory. In the years that followed, Sparta's veterans returned to their austere lives in Laconia, training the next generation with the same relentless discipline that had shattered an empire. They spoke little of the battle, no songs, no parades, no exaggerated tales around the fire. For them, duty was its own reward. But across Greece, the story grew.
Herodotus, the father of history, would later walk those same fields, interviewing survivors, measuring the mounds of the dead, recording for posterity how free men had turned back the greatest host the world had ever seen. Painters depicted the charge on pottery, crimson cloaks flowing, spears flashing, Persian horsemen tumbling in panic. Poets sang of Amnestus and his fatal stone, of Pausanias standing calm amid the arrows, of the gods themselves tilting the scales when courage proved worthy. The golden tripod at Delphi became a pilgrimage site, its inscription a reminder that no single city won alone. Sparta's iron, Athens' spirit, Tegia's fire, Corinth's steadfastness, all fused into one unbreakable spear that pierced the heart of tyranny. But Plataea did more than save Greece. It planted seeds that would bloom into the Golden Age. With the Persian threat gone, Athens rebuilt grander than before, raising the Parthenon on the Acropolis with spoils from the war, its marble gleaming white against the sky as eternal thank you to the gods who favored the charge that morning. Philosophers like Socrates would soon walk those streets, asking questions about justice and virtue that only free men could dare to ask. Playwrights like Aeschylus, who himself fought at Salamis and perhaps heard the distant roar from Plataea, wrote tragedies that explored the cost of hubris, the very arrogance that doomed Mardonius and his 40,000. Scientists, mathematicians, historians, all flourished in the sunlight preserved by those crimson shields. Their ripple reached even farther when a young Macedonian king named Alexander, centuries later, dreamed of conquering the Persian Empire that had once threatened his ancestors. He carried with him the memory of Plataea. He visited the battlefield, honored the Greek dead, and vowed to avenge every arrow that had fallen on that ridge. His own charges against Darius III echoed the Spartan phalanx, discipline over numbers, courage over fear. And when Rome rose to dominate the Mediterranean, its legions studied Greek battles, adapting the phalanx into their own formations, carrying the legacy of Plataea across continents. Even today, when we speak of standing firm against overwhelming odds, when we quote, "Come and take them" from Leonidas, or remember the few against the many, the shadow of Plataea looms behind Thermopylae. Because while Thermopylae was the defiant last stand, Plataea was the decisive answer, the moment the invaders were not just held, but crushed, driven from the land, their ambitions buried in Boeotian dust. It taught the world that defense alone is not enough. Sometimes you must charge, must seize the moment when the enemy believes you broken, and strike with everything you have. Think once more about that single charge. 40,000 of the world's finest warriors, backed by the wealth of half Asia, confident after days of dominance. Against them, 5,000 Spartans and their allies, thirsty, scattered, seemingly doomed. Yet in the span of hours, the plain became a graveyard, the river ran red, the empire's dream ended. All because a few thousand veterans refused to accept defeat, locked their shields, lowered their spears, and ran forward into legend. Their names are mostly lost to us now, only Pausanias, Amnestus, a handful of others preserved, but their deed endures. Every time a small nation defies a giant, every time courage turns the tide, every time free people choose to fight rather than submit, Plataea lives again. Those 700 lifetimes of relentless training compressed to the tip of that spear. The full Spartiates who formed the unbreakable core became the hammer that smashed the Persian host and forged the future. So when darkness seems overwhelming, when the arrows fall thick and the enemy seems endless, remember the ridge above the Esopus. Remember the silence before the order. Remember the thunder of bronze-shod feet racing downhill. Remember how one perfect charge crushed 40,000 invaders and saved everything that followed. This was not myth. This was history. This was the day discipline conquered numbers, freedom crushed tyranny, and a handful of Spartan veterans proved that the human spirit, forged in fire and tempered by will, can shatter any empire that dares to chain it. Plataea, vengeance delivered. Greece eternal.
the charge that echoes through the ages.
And as the centuries rolled onward, the charge at Plataea became more than a memory. It became a flame passed from generation to generation, a warning to tyrants and a beacon to the free. When the Greek cities quarreled in the decades that followed, when Sparta and Athens turned their spears on each other in the long tragedy of the Peloponnesian War, both sides still looked back to Plataea as the moment their shared blood had saved Hellas. Veterans of that battle, now old men with scarred arms and gray beards, would sit in the shade of olive trees and tell younger warriors that no quarrel between Greeks could ever match the terror of facing the Persian host across the Esopus. Some say those old voices helped delay the worst excesses, reminding proud cities that disunity had nearly cost them everything once before. When Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander rose in the north, they honored Plataea above all other battlefields. Alexander, before crossing into Asia to topple the Persian Empire that had once threatened his homeland, sacrificed at the mounds of the Greek dead and took with him the spirit of that charge. Disciplined heavy infantry smashing through lighter eastern formations, courage overwhelming numbers. His victories at Granicus, Issus, and Gabamela echoed Plataea in reverse. Now the heirs of Greece were the invaders, carrying the lesson learned in blood that no eastern host, however vast, could stand against the Greek way of war. The Romans, practical admirers of strength, studied Plataea carefully. Their historians read Herodotus, their generals copied the phalanx before inventing the legion, and when they finally conquered Greece, they treated the battlefield with reverence, repairing the monuments and leaving the lion over the Spartan graves untouched. Centuries later, when barbarian tribes poured into the weakening Roman Empire, the memory of Plataea lived on in Byzantine chronicles, reminding Eastern emperors that disciplined heavy infantry and bold counterattacks could still shatter superior numbers. In the Middle Ages, when new waves of invaders threatened Europe from the east, chroniclers writing about the Crusades compared Richard the Lionheart's charge at Arsuf or the stand at Vienna to Plataea, small forces of armored Western warriors smashing through Eastern hosts through sheer discipline and fury. The story crossed oceans. When European settlers in America faced their own struggles for freedom, they read Plutarch and Herodotus by candlelight, drawing inspiration from the few who had stood against the many. When the Founding Fathers designed a republic built on Greek models, they knew that democracy had been preserved on that Boeotian plain by men who refused to kneel. Even in our own time, when nations face threats that seem overwhelming, when commentators speak of unstoppable forces and inevitable decline, the charge at Plataea whispers a different truth. It reminds us that history is not written by numbers alone. Empires rise on wealth and size, but they fall when they meet men and women forged by something deeper: love of freedom, loyalty to brothers in arms, the refusal to accept subjugation. Think one final time about that morning in 479 BC, the dust choking the air, the arrows falling in black clouds, 40,000 of the world's proudest warriors advancing with drums and trumpets, and across the river, a thin line of crimson cloaks, shields locked, spears steady, waiting in silence until the perfect moment. Then the order, then the roar, then the thunder of the charge that broke an empire and saved a civilization. Those Spartan veterans did not know their names would echo for 2,500 years. They did not charge for glory or posterity. They charged because it was their duty, because their king had fallen at Thermopylae, because their homes and laws and children waited behind them. And in that single, perfect act of courage, they crushed 40,000 invaders, turned retreat into triumph, and secured the future of everything we cherish: freedom of thought, rule of law, the right to stand tall against any tyrant. Plataea was not the end of struggle, it was the beginning of possibility. Because on that day, 700 lifetimes of iron discipline, embodied in the core of that crimson line, proved once and for all that no darkness is absolute when even a few choose to advance into it. This was the charge that saved Greece. This was the charge that shaped the world. This was the day courage wrote history in blood and bronze, and the echoes still call to us across the ages. Stand firm, lock shields, and when the moment comes, charge. And so the flame of Plataea burns even now, 2.5 millennia later, in every heart that refuses to bow before overwhelming force. In the dark years of the 20th century, when new empires rose with mechanized hordes that blackened the skies and seemed unstoppable, soldiers and civilians alike drew strength from the ancient stories. Young men going into battle carried paperbacks of Herodotus in their pockets, reading by flashlight about the charge across the Asopus, reminding themselves that disciplined free men had once shattered the greatest host the world had known. Resistance fighters in occupied cities whispered the tale to one another. If 5,000 Spartans could crush 40,000, then surely a handful of determined souls could bleed a modern tyrant dry. When the Cold War cast its long shadow and superpowers faced off with weapons that could end civilization in minutes, strategists on both sides studied Plataea alongside Clausewitz, noting how morale, timing, and the willingness to seize the initiative could still outweigh raw numbers. Even in our present age, when threats no longer come in silk robes and golden armor, but in digital shadows, economic pressures, and waves of change that feel as relentless as Persian cavalry, the lesson endures. Nations that remember their history, that honor the discipline and unity of their ancestors, find the courage to stand firm. Leaders who understand that true strength lies not in endless compromise, but in knowing when to lock shields and charge, discover that the tide can turn in a single decisive moment. Individuals facing personal battles, illness, loss, injustice, often find unexpected reserves of will when they recall that ordinary men, forged by hard training and harder choices, once looked certain death in the face and advanced anyway. Plataea speaks to all of them, to all of us. It says that the human spirit is not measured by the size of the threat arrayed against it, but by the refusal to accept defeat as inevitable. It says that brotherhood, forged in shared struggle, can become unbreakable. It says that one bold act, taken at the perfect instant, can shatter chains that seemed eternal. Look back once more across the dust of that Boeotian plain. See the arrows falling like winter sleet. Hear the distant drums and trumpets of 40,000 confident invaders. Feel the ground tremble under their advance. And then witness the silence of the crimson line, the calm before the storm, the moment Pausanias lifts his eyes to the gods and gives the order that changes everything. Watch the phalanx surge forward as one living creature, bronze flashing, spears lowering, shields slamming together in perfect unity. See the impact, the chaos, the golden commander falling, the sudden reversal as panic races through ranks that moments before believed themselves invincible. That charge did not just win a battle, it preserved a way of life that valued truth over propaganda, courage over comfort, freedom over submission. Every book you read that challenges power, every vote you cast for liberty, every time you stand up for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible, Plataea is there, in the background, whispering that it has been done before. Those Spartan veterans, those Tegean allies, those Athenian brothers on the wing, they did not know the full weight of what they saved. They could not foresee libraries filled with Plato and Aristotle, theaters echoing with Sophocles, parliaments debating laws instead of obeying decrees, cathedrals and universities rising on the foundations of Greek thought. They only knew that their land, their laws, and their fallen comrades demanded one final effort. And in giving that effort, in making that single thunderous charge, they handed down to every generation that followed the most precious gift of all, the proven knowledge that tyranny can be broken, that empires can fall, that courage concentrated in a few determined hearts can crush any number of invaders. So let the story end where it truly never ends, with you. When your own Asopus lies before you, when the arrows fall and the enemy seems endless, remember the ridge at Plataea. Remember the silence before the roar. Remember the crimson cloaks advancing through the storm. Remember how 700 lifetimes of iron will, embodied in the spear tip of that charge, crushed 40,000 invaders and secured the light of freedom for ages yet unborn. The battle is over. The plain is quiet now, watched only by ancient mounds and a stone lion weathered by rain. But the charge goes on. It lives in every refusal to yield, every choice to stand, every moment someone decides that freedom is worth the risk. Plataea was not the last battle for the soul of the world. It was the first great proof that the soul of the world can never be conquered, as long as even a few are willing to lock shields and charge. This was the day that proved it. This was the charge that saved everything. And this is the story that still calls us forward, today, tomorrow, and forever.